I think we'll get started, shall we? Everyone okay? Yep. So good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning. For anyone who doesn't know me, my name's Mary Jack, and I work at Drummond Lorry. Just a small introduction to this morning's webinar, which is on returning to the workplace. I think it'll be quite an interesting one for each of you. We'll talk through a little bit about some of the current legislation, some maybe points to consider as employers, and maybe just some health and safety stuff in there as well. So thank you very much to Dean, Vicky and Matt from Armour Risk Consulting, and also Pam from Greig Melville HR. Just to make everyone aware, we are recording the session this morning, so if you do have any issues at all with that, please raise your hand. But otherwise, I shall cease and pass you over to Dean, I think, who'll talk us through the presentation.
Thanks, Mary. Good morning, everyone. As Mary's pointed out, we're at Armour Risk Consulting and working alongside Greig Melville just to talk through some of the challenges and considerations for returning to the workplace over the autumn. As I say, my name is Dean Mitchell. I'm the director at Armour Risk Consulting. We're health and safety and fire specialists based in Edinburgh, Cumbernauld, Scotland and England. What I'm going to do is move on to the first slide, really just as a bit of an introduction. Hopefully everyone can see that slide. You know, for autumn 2021, a lot of companies, this might be the first time that we're returning to the workplace in any kind of formal capacity over the last 18 months. I think we all dabbled a little bit with this over the last year or so. But now with the rollout of the vaccine, the relaxation of the large portion of the mandatory controls, both in England and Scotland, we're now starting to plan for a bit more of a medium and long-term return to the workplace, with many people already making that transition back, and I know we have at Armour too. What we have seen, we've obviously been very busy over the last 18 months with COVID risk assessments and things like this. But one of the biggest challenges that we've seen is this constantly shifting goalposts of what we've got to do in the workplace to keep it safe and to keep ourselves out of trouble, really. And we have spent a lot of time guiding our clients through changes. I know that Matt, Vicky and I have been glued to the government websites in both England and Scotland just to try and check what's happening. It's become a normal topic of conversation for the three of us. Have you seen what's happening today? Do you know what's happening now? Have you seen what they've done now? And then we're trying to communicate that onto our clients as well. So in England and Wales, the guidance that's published on the 14th of July and the Scottish guidance on the 6th of August still remains there or thereabouts. And the information that we're about to present to you guys covers that guidance there that was published over the summer with preparations for going back in autumn. So I'm now going to pass you over to Matt. Matt Ramsey, he's going to cover the kind of main guidelines and the practicalities of this. And then Matt is going to hand over to Vicky, and she'll talk more about what the practical considerations are for planning for a return to the workplace. And then Pam is going to talk a little bit about the HR elements and quite a lot on flexible working and hybrid working. We've done this before, it seemed to work pretty well. If you've got any questions, feel free to put them into the comments box on the meeting chat over on the right. We'll kind of man that as the meeting goes on and try and answer them as wherever we can. But if there's anything that we've not able to answer, we'll try and pick it up at the end of all three presentations. So feel free to chat away in that box over to the right, and we'll do what we can to answer them. So I'm now going to pass over to Matt, and when I say pass over, his IT side of things isn't working, so I'll control it from my side, Matt. You can just tell me when to move on.
So I feel like Professor Whitty, Dean, just saying next slide, please. Good morning, everybody. Can I just give my own personal welcome? Thank you for attending today. As Dean says, my name is Matthew Ramsey. I'm a health and safety manager for Armour Risk Consulting. My background is I've been involved in health and safety for nearly 20 years now, and have worked across many sectors and industries. I started my career working for the Health and Safety Executive and became a regulatory inspector. So I have a very kind of enforcement kind of led background. So I'm quite keen on the law, but also for me, it's about educating, influencing and guiding companies, which basically I owned when I moved into the private sector in 2016. As Dean has already alluded to, the last 18, 19 months for us has seen health and safety come to the fore for many companies. You know, we all now know what PPE stands for. I doubt 19 months ago many people did. And a key part of that has been interpreting government guidance across all the different administrations within the UK, and then converting that into clear guidance for employers, and also then breaking that down again into what is applicable to domestic settings, but also workplace settings, because we also found there's been confusion about that too. So as you can see from this slide, first main line is it has been a time of constant change and differing approaches by the administrations, and we've done our best to guide our clients through this. Following the latest updates, restrictions have now been lifted in the main, but some have stayed. So as we see within Scotland, we still have to wear face coverings in particular areas. We still need to go through test to protect self-isolation. But within England, it's just self-isolation that remains the law. If you test positive or you're symptomatic, you have to go through that process. Their main tagline in England is caution and restraint. So the onus is very much put on the individual members of the public, employers, employees, for instance. Dean, if you could move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So within Scotland, we have face coverings. OK, so they must be worn in any indoor communal area, workplace, and where there are no measures in place to keep people separated by either a partition or a distance of at least 1 metre. Communal areas in workplaces are those where people mingle or gather, so that's either entrances, exits to buildings, so your foyers, receptions, etc., staff rooms, stairs, lifts, training rooms and changing rooms. If an employer chooses to wear a face covering within the workplace, where there is 1 metre distancing or a partition, they should be supported to do so by employees. So just when we thought there was no social distancing anymore, we still do have a requirement of a 1 metre rule in place. OK, so these would be in kind of communal areas. But from a practical point of view, 1 metre allows more seats around a meeting table or for training. Even most office desks this time, you probably get normal seating spacing sat out with people at their desks. If they're sat down, we go around with our tape measures and measure between one seat and the next, and that is usually more than 1 metre. So that satisfies that rule. So it's not too much of a practical impact on businesses as we're seeing it. However, most companies I work with have created more space, either through managing staff numbers, hybrid working, smaller teams coming in during the day, or indeed redesigning their workplaces, especially if more people are now working at home and you need less people in the office. Just creating more space, which I think is key to getting staff comfortable to come back into the workplace, which is where consultation comes in to reintroduce them. It's we also suggest having like coffee mornings or an open morning just to get them come back in an informal way, just to say, OK, this is how the office is now set up. This is what it looks like. These are the precautions we have in place that we're now all well aware of. So we'll have controls in place like, they'll know not to come into work if they're symptomatic. If they do come into work, we expect them to sanitize their hands on the way in. There will be enhanced cleaning of the office. All the touch points, there'll be sanitizing wipes for desks, there'll be plenty of space. So we've already got these kind of precautions and levels of controls in place, and it's just about explaining that through consultation and education. Thank you, Dean. If I could have the next slide, please. OK. With regards to face coverings in England and Wales, yes, they have gone. There is no legal requirement by the English government for you to wear face coverings. OK, however, companies such as Transport for London still require you to wear them on the buses and on the tubes, OK, and inside stations, etc. But we also see it as being good practice. We obviously we're keen advocates of health and safety, and we always say you should strive for best practice. So, for instance, many of the clients we work with have offices in both Scotland, Wales and England and Northern Ireland. And we say, OK, best practice would be to go for a consistent approach, higher standard, so wear face coverings within communal areas until you sat down at desk. Otherwise, it just causes confusion amongst employees if they are going between offices in different countries within the UK. However, as I've travelled around, I still see people wearing face coverings within stations, within public areas. So just because the legal requirement has gone, it's not led to a wholesale abandonment of the use of face coverings. And I'd just reiterate, the English guidance of caution and restraint. So that is something we can also use to try and influence the behaviour of our employees too. Dean, if we could have the next slide, please.
Yes.
Okay, with regards to test and protect and NHS test and trace, the rules did change slightly on this with regards to getting people back to work sooner if they test negative. So as we can see, everyone must continue to follow test to protect. Okay, you must stay at home if you have symptoms or test positive for COVID-19, even if you have received 2 doses of the COVID-19 vaccination. The exemptions now are people will no longer need to self-isolate for 10 days as a close contact if they have received 2 doses of the COVID-19 vaccination under our UK government programme and 2 weeks have passed since receiving the 2nd dose, or you're under 18 and are asymptomatic and return a negative PCR test. Okay, so if you've had your PCR test and you've had your 2 JAGs, your 2 injections, you can come back to work. So that's just trying to speed the process up instead of losing all of our employees for 10 days while they self-isolate, just to see. Okay, with regards to individuals turning 18, they should follow the guidance for under 18-year-olds for 4 months to allow time to become fully vaccinated. So if they're 18 and 1 day old and they get their 2nd vaccination, they then need to let that settle in for 4 months before they can act like the rest of us or adults. After that, if they are partially or non-vaccinated, they will be required to self-isolate for 10 days as a close contact. Just to reiterate, individuals who test positive for COVID-19, even if they're double vaccinated or partially and non-vaccinated, will still be required to self-isolate. Okay. Dean, if we could have the next slide, please.
Yep.
So precautionary measures, what can we do as employers? Okay, we can encourage our staff to get vaccinations. So, we can offer paid leave to attend vaccination centres if it's during working hours, if they get their letter come through the letterbox. We can also distribute NHS information about vaccination, which is freely available from the NHS or government websites. Just that we'll go back to the coffee mornings, you can hand that out as well. Again, it's about educating and influencing. So there still may be some people who are unsure about vaccinations. So this is, probably the most we can do to encourage it at the moment. What else can we do? As I said, we've got controls in place already. We're carried out a risk assessment, and that would say, good hand and respiratory hygiene measures. So providing access to sanitizer and hand washing facilities, regular cleaning of work equipment, chairs and workstations, regular cleaning of and sanitizing of breakout areas. And then, if sneezing or coughing around people, do so with a tissue, handkerchief or elbow. The benefit is, we've all been doing this for 19 months now, so it's pretty much ingrained. So it shouldn't be too much of an ask for employees to do this, in our opinion. With regards to COVID risk assessments, the guidance now states that this should be reviewed every 3 weeks. Okay, of course, if you need help with the COVID risk assessments, feel free to get in touch with us after the webinar. The reason why it's 3 weeks is that, things may well change. Some ways of working may work. You may need to change other aspects of how the office is organised. That's why it's a live living document. So hopefully you've all got your COVID risk assessment in place, but if not, please do ask for help. I'm more than willing to provide that for you. Dean, if you can move on to the next slide, please.
Yeah.
Just going to take a quick look at ventilation now. You may have heard this being touted in the news over the recent past month or so. Why is it an issue? Basically, adequate ventilation reduces how much the virus is in the air, albeit it is a very low risk of being spread in the air. It helps to reduce the risk from aerosol transmission. So this type of transmission can happen when someone breathes in small particles in the air, known as aerosols, after a person with the virus has been in the same enclosed area. So what we're going to do is prevent that from happening. The risk of aerosols is greater in areas that are poorly ventilated. Although ventilation reduces risk from aerosols, it's a minimal impact on droplet transmission from people in close contact or contact transmission, i.e. touching surfaces. As I said, it's extremely low. As long as there's an adequate supply of fresh air and ventilation, most types of air conditioning systems can continue to be used as normal. However, this becomes more complex when we do have a centralized ventilation system in operation, i.e. circulating air all around the business, all around the building itself. You should turn off the recirculation of air and use a fresh air supply where possible. And Dean, if we could have the next slide, please. So providing a source of fresh air to employees, okay, it's a legal requirement already and has been for many years. It comes under the welfare regs, okay. But simple measures that we can take as employees is opening windows and doors that do not need to remain closed for other purposes, i.e. internal fire doors. Those must not be propped open unless you've got a proprietary piece of equipment like a door guard which will hold them open for you. Okay, we can use indoor fans in combination with open doors and windows to further increase air movement. We can have specialised window fans, box fans or tower fans that can be placed in front of windows to either draw air in or blow air out to aid circulation. So fans can face towards the window, blowing it in and out, as I just said, or we can have mechanical ventilation systems which can be operated at maximum design flow rate, even if the space is a low occupancy. Okay. Where there are both high level and low level openable windows in a room, it's recommended that we open the high level windows during the cooler weather, which we're now entering. Okay, in the first instance, as incoming air will be warmed as it flows down into the room, thereby reducing cold drafts. So if you're able to do that, that will increase ventilation without adversely affecting thermal comfort. So this improves mixing of the outside air with air in the room before reaching an occupied zone. To maximise airflow when drafts are not concerned, both high and low level windows should be opened. This does not just increase the opening area, but creates a more efficient flow, thereby increasing the dilution of pollutants. There's also been some talk about the use of CO2 monitors. This has been mentioned in guidance as a means to measure whether there is adequate ventilation in the workplace. So if you have a high number of workers and poor ventilation, then they may be useful, but HSE's own guidance stipulates that any space below 50 square meters would not give an accurate reading due to individuals' rates and breath. But also there's another factor as well that we need to consider, is that if you're using a kind of smogging system for regular sanitization, then makes CO2 monitors kind of null and void, really. You don't need to use them. So if you'd be interested in learning more about managing ventilation in the workplace, if you leave a comment, we can get back to you afterwards. Dean, if we could have the next slide, please.
Yep.
Okay, so you'd be pleased to hear this is my final word on my section before I hand you across to my colleague Vicky. So working from home, hybrid working. So Scotland, businesses are encouraged to continue to support staff to work from home where possible and appropriate. England and Wales, the government is no longer instructing people to work from home if they can. However, the government expects and recommends a gradual return over the summer. So we're now through to that into autumn. I think it's here to stay for the foreseeable, the hybrid working. It's crucial that we have those staff consultations that I mentioned previously and well-being discussions as well. But also we need to consider the business needs. We just have to find the right balance. Scotland sees these work patterns as an important mitigation to controlling the virus, and they keep this in their back pocket as well. So they may well say, continue to work at home as opposed to a gradual return to work. Just for me to say thank you for your time today. I hope you attend our next webinar, and over to you, Vicky and Dean. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt. I'll move the slide on, Vicky, and then you can take control.
Okay. Hi everyone, thanks Matt for that informative presentation. I'm Vicky and I've been working with Armour Risk Consulting for the past 2 years. Prior to this, I was a health and safety advisor for a nationwide retailer. And before I discovered health and safety, I worked in hospitality and retail sector. So for the past 18 months, like everybody else, I've been working from home. Dean does let me out for the occasional site inspection, but I am most definitely ready to head back to the office. Many businesses for the past 18 months have been operating from many different locations, mainly employees' homes, but so everybody is probably ready to come back. Matt's covered the recent government guidance, including precautionary measures enabling the return to the workplace. And as you have heard, the most recent lifting of restrictions has been the signal that we can all start to gradually return back. So here's Armour's guide to a safe return to the workplace. So the first step that we recommend is for you to review your risk assessment. And there's two purposes to this. The first is to make sure that all the tasks you've already recorded on there can be completed with reduced capacity of people, because we're probably expecting you to go back on a gradual basis. So it's best for you to go back and just make sure all the tasks can be completed with the reduced numbers of people. And the second part is to ensure that all your COVID-19 measures have been recorded as part of your risk assessment, as Matt has already outlined. So that these will protect your visitors, your employees, and any contractors who come to site. As Matt has already outlined, a regular review of your COVID risk assessment should happen every 3 weeks. This allows you to sort of change it if the working regulations change by the government, or if your working practices aren't doing exactly what they want. So you may have to go back and review it on a regular basis. This is also the time to review your emergency procedures, because as we've already said, you're going to have reduced numbers probably in your workplace. So you need to make sure that your emergency procedures are fully working. And this allows you to identify if you've got a shortage of fire wardens or first aiders. So that lets you get other people trained up to cover the shortfall. And the best way to test your revised emergency procedures is to perform a drill to ensure that everybody experiences the new procedures. So it isn't a case of just doing one fire drill. You may have to do a few if you've got different people doing and on different days. Matt alluded to this during his section. Staff discussion is really important. So it's vital that you're talking regularly to your employees at every stage as you make your plan. Excuse me. Businesses should start with a plan of how you're going to reopen. This might be deciding how many people you want to come back to, sort of a operating capacity, deciding if various departments have to work together or if they can be separate, and sort of if you can work on a cohort basis where it's a regular team and on a regular day. So once you've got your plan, then you should consult with your staff. Now that can be done as a survey or on a one-to-one basis, but this will allow you to listen to your employees because they may have solutions or they may pose other questions, but it will allow them to be involved as part of the process, and also it will help you judge how your employees are feeling about the return to work, because you're going to have some people who are ready to come back and you'll have some people who aren't so ready, and you'll have a mix in between. So it's a really good chance for you to have that communication. The managers should be sharing on a regular basis the proposed plans, because it'll involve operating procedures, working patterns, workstation layouts, maybe changes of furniture. So it's best to be sharing that on a regular basis. Definitely share the steps you've already taken as COVID measures, because you'll have put something in place way back before we left the offices. So it's important to maintain that, but also share via an open day, as Matt said, about how you're going to have the office when you come back. This will also give employees a chance to maybe meet with their line managers in a face-to-face setting, which is the first time they maybe have seen each other. Teams is good, but sometimes a face-to-face meeting is even better. And your open days will also allow colleagues to see each other again, because they may have not done that for a long time. And also share your risk assessment with your employees if it has changed, so they're aware of the changes. So once you've got your employees back in place, then we need to think about the maintenance of your equipment and systems. Most workplaces have equipment that requires regular servicing, but during the past 18 months, due to various reasons, building may have been closed, you can't get a contractor, the service and maintenance may have lapsed. It's important that your regulatory inspections of equipment such as lifts and gas heating systems should happen before anybody returns to the workplace. Your gas systems need their annual service and the gas safety check needs to happen to ensure the system is safe for use. As Matt has already outlined, ventilation is a really good precautionary measure. So if your place of business has a ventilation system, again, it'd be advisable to have this service before your employees return. Our favourite, Legionella sampling, should be completed because you've had long periods of inactivity over the last 18 months. So there might be some water outlets that haven't been used. You may have been doing your weekly flushes, but it would be good to have some sampling done. If your place of business has a cold water storage tank, a clean and disinfection would be advisable as well. In terms of fire safety, the fire alarm should be serviced alongside your emergency lighting to ensure that all call points and all lights are working, because you're going to have less people who might be reporting anything to be not working. And lastly, you should be doing your fire extinguishers and your portable appliances as normal. But the thing to remember is, as you're all coming back, a lot of other workplaces are coming back, so there will be high demands of competent contractors at this time. So please make sure you stick with your competent contractors. If you've service agreements already in place, or if you have to search for a new one, make sure you see all their insurance and their qualifications. Okay, if anything happens and you get inspected by a regulatory body and you haven't had certain items serviced, they will give dispensation if you can prove that you've got that you've been looking for these services. So I would recommend keeping your email trail of when you've been asking for appointments. If it's just been phone calls, still recording a diary that you've been making these phone calls and trying to have the arrangements made. Okay. So the last 18 months have seen a focus on cleanliness and good hygiene to prevent the spread of the virus. Most buildings and businesses you enter have hand sanitizer on offer. Or if you're like me now, you just carry a wee bottle with you all the time. Many businesses have had reduced cleaning in their premises due to no presence or very little presence, but dirt and dust have accumulated over time. A deep clean of your premises will give a positive impression to your employees as they return. Once you've got your deep clean done, then you really want to maintain that high standard of cleanliness. So as Matt alluded to earlier on, enhanced cleaning of areas of high usage like breakout areas, toilets, shower facilities, reception, door handles, all the list could go on, should be incorporated into your cleaning regime. So that could be that means you might need a sit down conversation with your cleaning contractor to ensure that they can maintain these levels. Another thing that we've seen introduced is cleaning stations within the workplace, and this would allow employees to do their own cleaning. So we would suggest that antibacterial wipes, antibacterial spray, paper towels, hand sanitizer, and even face masks. This will give the freedom to employees to clean their own workstations regularly and also may help relieve their anxiety. Frequent and regular cleaning of workstations, especially in hot desking situations, is advisable. And the last standard is good hygiene standards in kitchens. We've all been there, we've all seen the kitchen that just everything gets dumped in, and that just can't happen now. So employees should be washing up regularly their crockery if they've been using it, whether it's shared or their own that they've brought in, or making use of the dishwasher and making sure that somebody puts the dishwasher on. But the best thing is to make sure that people are washing up, and just so it doesn't become a mess. If you're a business that provides food supplies to employees like tea and coffee, we would suggest single servings or individually wrapped items to prevent potential spread. go. Okay, so we're nearly there at the end. Employee training. So as part of the reintroduction back to the office place, employees should have fire safety training. This is important as if there's been amendments to the emergency procedures we already talked about. And for some colleagues, remember, this might be their first time they've ever been in your workplace or in any workplace. So it's really important everybody has their fire safety training, and this should include a walk round of premises to highlight the fire exits and the assembly point. For fire wardens who are returning, a refresher training would be beneficial after they've had a long period of not having to do their fire job. But you'd obviously would have to do full training where required for new fire wardens where you've identified a shortfall. First aid. First aid certificates should be reviewed because time has marched on, and so certificates may have expired during the period of the pandemic. So it would be good to review the certificates to make sure that everybody is fully qualified. As part of your review of the emergency procedures, you may have identified additional needs for first aiders or appointed persons. So again, that can depend, the level of first aid support depends on the size of your business and the level of risk in the workplace. The basic level is to have an appointed person, and this person would be in charge of the first aid supplies and sort of take control of the situation should something happen, and it requires no formal training. The next level would be your emergency first aid at work, which is a one-day course where people are instructed on the use of a defibrillator and sort of assessing a condition and monitoring a condition until more experienced medical help arrives. And the last one is the most qualified level, which is the first aid at work, which is a 3-day course. And this is further information about identifying and treating conditions such as stroke, feeling faint, heart conditions, and it'll be the fun course where you get to do the dressing up with the bandages. The last bit of training we would recommend is the DSE training, which is your display screen. So we've all had a long time away from the workplace, so it'd be best for everybody to complete a DSE risk assessment when they return to identify any challenges they may have. Over the last 18 months, we've all been using screens an awful lot more in both work and our personal life, and we probably all have been forgetting our DSE breaks. People have changed due to the increased screen time. They have got older. Some people may be suffering from long COVID or other conditions. There may be new furniture in the workplace. They may have a new location where the workstation is situated, and this can all affect the DSE use, and so it should be evaluated. On returning to work, where employees may not have a designated desk anymore, it would be beneficial for colleagues to be trained on how to correctly set up their desk. This is for working in the office, but also at home to make sure they've got the proper support. They're using the right chair, they're using their mouse correctly, and probably not like me, have a clear desk, because I'm probably the worst at that. So, in summary, we ask you to review your risk assessment and emergency procedures, have ongoing communication and listen regularly to your employees, organise maintenance and servicing of equipment and systems, promote good hygiene and cleanliness, complete the necessary training and action the DSE risk assessments. Now over to Pam.
Okay, hopefully everybody can hear me and see me and we're on the right slide. I'm having a few technical issues this side. My Wi-Fi is dropping in and out, so let's hope that it stays with me until I get through the presentation. My name's Pam Watson. I've worked with Greig Melville HR now for a period of 4 years as a senior HR consultant, which means basically I do everything and anything to do with HR. My specialism is training and development and anything which improves performance. So there you go. Prior to that, I worked with an employment law company for 6 years, and prior to that I have a background in retail management and regional HR. So sort of been through a lot of sectors and in a lot of places over time. So I'd just like to say before I start that the slides that you will see today have been amended from a Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development webinar on the topic of hybrid working, which is an excellent resource that we refer to constantly. And thanks to Matt and Vicky for two very informative presentations on the legislative and practical aspects of health and safety in relation to COVID and hybrid working. So as the basis for my presentation, it's really to quote from the Scottish Coronavirus Safer Businesses and Workplaces guidance, which came out on the 6th of August in relation to the beyond level 0 status, which we find ourselves in now. And that guidance states that a gradual return to offices can begin when the country moves beyond level 0 in line with staff wellbeing discussions and business need. However, home working will continue to be an important mitigation for controlling the virus. So for now, we would ask that businesses still support employees to do this where possible and in conjunction with, in consultation with employees. So we encourage employers to consider for the longer term a hybrid model of home and office working, which may of course have benefits beyond the need to control the virus. So therefore, the situation at present, as the restrictions continue to ease, both employers and employees are thinking about how far they want to go back to the pre-pandemic working arrangements. Many of you have decided against a return to business as usual. Some of you are abandoning the office altogether, switching to full remote working, whilst others are doing a bit of both, with staff splitting their time between the office and home. And again, you know, some of you want your staff back in the office when the restrictions are fully lifted and life to return to normal, whatever that looks like. But not all of your employees will be happy about this for a variety of reasons. So today's session for me really is about making that transition back to the workplace, focusing how and why you might want to adopt some form of hybrid working, what you need to think about, and how to respond to requests for this type of work. So to put this into context, it's early days yet for hybrid working, but there is very much a growing focus. And according to research carried out recently by the CIPD, 2/3 or 63% of employers are planning to introduce or enable more home and hybrid working over the next 6 to 12 months. So that really highlights the need to look at this now. And many of you are understandably wary at the prospect of completely lifting of restrictions, as are your employees, especially if you've spent the last 16 months or more either working from home, on furlough, with that scheme incidentally due to end today, or protected by COVID workplace measures. In England, there's been particular concern, for example, from unions and workers over the reversal of the mask mandate, as Matt alluded to, in the stores and the hospitality venues. So it's clear that unless this situation is handled properly, there is a potential storm brewing between teams uncomfortable to return to the old way of working and employers that are keen to get back to some sense of normality. And there's certainly a balance that needs to be struck, and that balance would seem to be a form of hybrid working. Before I move on, a point I'd like to make is that hybrid working is only one form of flexible working. This is so much more. So out with your location flexibility, which we're talking about here, you should also be looking at what is commonly known as time flexibility. So that covers all areas like staggered hours, core hours, compressed hours, adjusted shift rotations, any 5 from 7, etc. for the future. I do have a handout which I will make available to everybody at the end of the session, and I will include some detail on those areas within that. And the reason I suppose that this is so key now is that less than a third, 30% of employers are planning to try to increase the uptake of other forms of flexible working over the next 6 to 12 months. And really, we do need that greater focus on flexible working to come into play. So really, we should be thinking about that now as well. The focus again has been further sort of brought into sharp consideration by the fact that the government, as of the 24th of September, has now launched a consultation on changes to existing flexible working legislation, which includes flexible working becoming the default option from day one. So this isn't going to create a legal right for working from home, but it certainly puts the burden on you as the employer to prove that there are good reasons not to do so. And you may also be required to publish your flexible working policies in the future. And on the 1st of February, the CIPD launched its own campaign calling for flexible working, for the right to request flexible working to be day one right for all employees. And about a third of employers already do this. And certainly in Greig Melville HR, we actively encourage our clients to do this as a good practice. So where are we now? You'll see from the comments on the screen, it's been clear that there has been a consistent employee voice over the last year where people are wanting to work more remotely in the future. And prior to the pandemic, we had something like 5% of employees working from home. During the pandemic, we've had 100 million people working from home. We are still subject to some restrictions, so we're in this gap at the moment, and we won't know if the hybrid working is effective for us until we've tried it. It is a very new way of working, and therefore we don't have any good practice yet. We're waiting on that to emerge, and it's obviously going to take us time to review the lessons we've learned from the pandemic, implement those new working practices associated with hybrid working, and see how well they do or don't work. So we've moved away from, I suppose, what we call the traditional way of working, the office working, which is how we've always collaborated in the past. We've then moved to remote working, which has been very much forced due to the pandemic, and now starting to move into this hybrid working situation, which should be a choice and an opportunity to reset and to rethink both as employers and employees. So where do we go from here? In terms of planning for your hybrid working, one of the first things, I think Vicky mentioned this, to do is to carry out some form of listening exercise with your workforce in order to establish their working preferences and to learn the lessons from the pandemic experiences that we've all gone through. Your line managers will be key to providing your supportive culture here. So it's all about getting them on board with what you're trying to achieve. There may well still be technology issues. There's certainly going to be well-being issues. This is the time to trial different ways of doing things and ask for feedback. Nothing should be set in stone at this point. And remember that this may present opportunities for wider flexible working procedures for hours as well. It may not just be about location. And it's very much about considering individual circumstances where nobody should be at a detriment. And we will look at this in more detail in terms of legislative considerations in a minute. So the key foundations which underpin successful hybrid working, these are about culture and practicalities, and they will require a fair amount of line manager competence because this is very much a new way of managing and leading. And you will see in the middle there, moved on. Have I got back? Someone nod their head.
That's holding off.
Brilliant. Okay. Yeah. So hopefully we've moved on from the how will I know if they're working mentality. And I think it's fair to say for the most part that we're not dealing with skiving issues, but we really must focus on the fact that high trust equals high performance. And we need to think very much about how we assess that performance and switch it to base it on outcomes, on values, on contributions, on results and not on presence, you know, and we really need to challenge that flexible working stigma because the commitment is there from the majority of the people. We also need to use our technology, she says tongue in cheek, to collaborate effectively. So your Teams chat, your Zoom, how do you update? When do you update? What are you updating for? You know, what are your team rules for your communication methods for your different tasks that you're carrying out? It is very easy to lose your energy and your creativity remotely. You know, which tasks are going to be more effective face-to-face? You should be scheduling those into your physical workplace times. And you also need to schedule time into your physical workplace when your support's going to be most needed. So what are you going to do when new people start? What are you going to do when people move into new roles, when people are promoted? And it's about developing a rota then to share time in the workplace for those tasks. And we should be doing all of this with inclusion in mind. So it's about giving fairness of opportunity and not proximity bias. We should also be very mindful of the well-being challenges of hybrid working. We need to be educating ourselves and others on balance, on good habits, on transition, on working to people's own energies and what works best for them. So these are simple things like encouraging people to establish routines, take breaks in between video calls, block out a proper lunch break. And again, you know, as employers and managers, notice signs of overworking. Are people starting early? Are they working late? What are they doing with their former commute time? And really, we should be sort of starting to train and equip our managers to be able to have those well-being conversations. All of this should be facilitated by good communication as a shared responsibility. So, you know, it's about creating opportunities for co-working, cross-social events, and thinking about how you're going to maintain those connections between home and the office by the use of project groups, etc. The supporting practicalities with this, obviously, you need to have a plan for dealing with this interim period. People may be taking on different roles, transferring to different teams. They may be working entirely remotely, entirely in the office, half and half. How are you going to monitor and review that? You know, very simple practical things like desks and chairs. What do you need to continue to provide? Expenses, what are you paying? How equip are your managers to deal with this? Do they need development and support in order to make this happen? Do they have the leadership and management skills to ensure that this works? And what are you going to do differently as a result of this at every stage of your employee life cycle? So consider this from your recruitment to your retirement and everything in between. You know, what are your potential effects here on things like induction, on learning and development, on how you carry out performance appraisal reviews, etc. And then making it stick. This is all really about being prepared to change, measure as you go and adapt. Recognize that some people are going to find, you know, continued change difficult. Some people will find it more difficult than other people. It's a good idea to use some champions, so some people who are passionate and interested in this kind of thing, your creatives. And remember that you will still have those learning needs potentially around technology, around work-life balance. It is absolutely going to be a bit messy. There is no single way to do hybrid working, but with the right vision and the right culture and your leadership and the right procedures and policies in place to support it, you will give it the best possible opportunity for success. And I'll finish off with sort of some of the legal implications surrounding hybrid working. And I will say straight away, there's nothing hugely earth-shattering yet, because the law is slow at catching up with trends. So essentially, we are dealing with the existing legislation in terms of flexible working at the moment. And as I said earlier, though, we now have government consultation, which was launched on the 24th of September, and that will run until the 1st of December. And we will be monitoring that very closely to see what changes that's going to result in. Just move this. So in terms of the legal implications for hybrid working, then the employment law considerations do depend on whether it's the employee that's requesting the change to the working arrangements or if the employer is enforcing it. The health and safety implications are the same in either scenario. There are two ways for employees to request hybrid working. So obviously informally and formally. The informal is where you're not looking to invoke your formal flexible working processes, just work in a hybrid manner. This is obviously easier to respond to, and you can try this out and you can see how it goes. And that's sort of what we're recommending at the moment. As I said earlier, don't set anything in stone. Let's try it and see. In terms of the process for formal flexible working requests, there isn't anything new here yet with regards to the requirements an employer has to meet. So if you have an employee with 6 months service, they can make the statutory flexible working application, which if agreed results in a permanent change. There is an 8-week pay award capped at £544 per week currently for failing to deal with any flexible working request within a reasonable manner. So if you're not following the ACAS code of practice in the area, there are obviously permitted reasons for rejecting a request, such as business grounds where hybrid is not appropriate, if the company is not able to meet customer demand, or if there's going to be an effect on quality or performance, for example. There are inevitable claims on discrimination if you single people out on the grounds of what we call a protected characteristic. So, for example, an employee who's refused a flexible working request made for childcare reasons, whether statutory or not, may have an indirect sex discrimination claim on the basis that the requirement to work in the office has a disproportionate impact on female employees, who are the ones most likely to have those caring responsibilities. It is worth bearing in mind that discrimination compensation is uncapped and also quite often includes a payment for injury to feelings. If remote working has gone well during your pandemic, it may be difficult to justify refusing it in future. Although arguably there is a difference between staff working remotely on a temporary basis in a health emergency and doing so on a permanent basis. But if an employee wants to work remotely due to a disability, then as an employer, you would have to consider this as a reasonable adjustment together with medical evidence and consultation with the employee. And any refusal of that would need to be objectively justified. In terms of the situation where the employer is proposing the hybrid working, if it's offered as an option and employees are free to choose, then there are unlikely to be employment law related issues. You would just ensure that the agreement regarding the arrangements are clearly confirmed in writing, which we would suggest in any circumstance anyway. Trying to enforce hybrid working is a tricky area. The employment contract will usually specify the office as the place to work, but you may have varied this verbally. If managers gave employees assurances about how they would work following the pandemic and employees relied on these to make personal changes such as moving away, then they may be able to claim that they have a contractual right to continue to work from home, although this is likely to be difficult to prove. It is possible, though, that regardless of what the employment contract says, a badly handled insistence on returning to the workplace could breach the implied duty of trust and confidence, which might allow the employee to resign and claim constructive dismissal if they have 2 years service. However, again, this is unlikely to be viable except in narrow circumstances. If your employees are not wanting to engage, you could check if you have a contract employment clause to allow individuals to work from home, but this is pretty rare, as it's usually the result of an employee request rather than an employer wanting this to happen. And similarly, any mobility clauses which are in there are usually linked to specific geographical areas, so you're unlikely to be able to rely on this to enforce hybrid working. I would say, remember, this is very different in the nature of the setup compared to previous home working. And actually, you may find that the younger people are the ones who are pushing for the flexible arrangements. But again, that may be more difficult to arrange as they may be in house shares and flats. So, you know, they may not have the facilities to work effectively. I think we need to watch very carefully for test cases and see what happens here. And we've started to see some of those come through in terms of health and safety considerations at the moment. And if you do get refusal or resistance,
I'm going frozen again.
What then would be your fair reason for dismissal for that? In terms of your fair reason, I seem to have lost my speaker's notes on this for some reason. Just bear with me, there we go. In this scenario, you would be terminating the contract on current terms and then starting a new contract involving the hybrid working after a notice period. So you may potentially be reducing the number of people working in your office, and there could possibly be an argument for redundancy on the basis of that. The types of objections you're going to get will include, for example, impact on work-life balance, altered childcare arrangements, or issues with commuting back to the office. But employers, similarly, who have objectively justifiable reasons for requiring employees to work in the office and follow a fair and reasonable process, should be able to avoid, you know, the legal claims that I've just talked about. And consultation, obviously, is key here. It's good practice to build trust in the process and engage staff, and you must do this if you're varying contract of employment. And remember that you need to follow a collective consultation process where there are 20 or more employees that you're looking to impose change upon. Lastly, other aspects of hybrid working, we would absolutely recommend that you have a hybrid working policy if this is something that you're going to implement with a longer term view. However, we're certainly going to wait on the outcome of the government consultation before deciding what all of our flexible working policies look like, and we will have some form of a combination of what we have at the minute in terms of home working and flexible working together with the new hybrid working. So, you know, but when you're starting to think about this, involve your managers and your employees in shaping and reviewing what you've got. You know, what does it look like? What's it going to look like in your organisation? Link it to what you have existing in terms of flexible working and home working policies. And by all means, you know, come to us if you need a starting support or you want to discuss anything in terms of this. You know, it's difficult to get this right when you're looking at more than one individual. It's not going to be easy for a whole team, and there's going to be lots of factors which are going to come into play. Some other things which you need to think about, obviously, in terms of data protection. So it's ensuring that data is kept securely at home, information security from a business point of view, insurance and any equipment that's in people's homes, you know, that ideally should be employers' insurance, and checking that there's no conflict in terms of a home insurance there. We have very much been relying on goodwill throughout the pandemic. You know, are we going to continue with this, or do we need to make this more formalised? You're going to have to think about provision of equipment as well, people providing their own equipment. If that's the case, there may be an impact on national minimum wage. So, you know, that's going to reduce their pay by the cost of the equipment there. And I suppose above all, what we need to remember is the need to act reasonably and treat people fairly. So in summary, it's not going to be easy managing a blended workforce. You're looking on the one hand to have parity across your employees, but at the same time, you're not going to be treating everybody exactly the same, as they're going to be working differently. So, you know, look again, as I said earlier, at flexing hours, if not your location, so that you can offer something for everybody and you don't create a them and us scenario. So, you know, what other options can you provide for people? Clearly, some jobs cannot work from home, but giving people the autonomy to organise their own shifts, perhaps around core hours, etc., is a good way forward. So it's very important not to forget the other forms of flexible working, but it's very much about what's going to work best for your organisation and the individuals, and it will be a learning process where we need to make adjustments as we go along. I suppose really it's considering how this is going to impact your business if you do or if you don't go with some form of hybrid or flexible working. And there will be wins from performance, from inclusion, from well-being if we implement it properly. There will also be an impact on things like ongoing career opportunities, progression, training, bonuses. So it's about, again, making sure that you don't disadvantage anybody, and we have to make sure that there is ongoing access to development and career conversations for all employees and a fair allocation of work and opportunities. So again, it's very much about you identifying areas where potentially inequalities have developed during the pandemic, and then set out your plans to address those to ensure that we have no long-term detrimental impacts on either an individual or the organisation. So very much tracking the data and reviewing it around recruitment, promotion, reward, retention in the light of hybrid working to ensure that there are no unintended negative consequences, and make the adjustments where needed. And again, as I said earlier, in terms of disability, look at where that might be a helpful, reasonable adjustment for an employee with a disability or a long-term health condition. So I suppose really what I'm saying here is to take steps to ensure that you have that equality of experience between the employees in the office and the employees at home, and those that are straddling both roles. And the bigger question for many of you is likely to be whether the requirement to work in the office will impact your longer term retention and recruitment. A recent survey by YouGov found that 57% of employees want to be able to continue working from home all or part of the time. And undoubtedly, some people will look to change jobs if they can't get that hybrid or flexible working that they now want. If you don't adapt, what will that cost you in terms of recruitment, retention, and talent? And time will tell how effective and feasible it's going to be to operate large-scale working on a remote basis, on a long-term basis. And it's possible that we may revert back to some of the old patterns, but for now, we need to try it and see. I think many of you will be aware of the issues at the moment with recruitment, particularly within the transport sectors and the hospitality sectors, for those of you who are in those sectors, so we need to do our very best to attract and retain the people within our business. As I said earlier, I have a summary handout which considers all forms of flexible working, and it also has a very useful flow chart in it for identifying if hybrid working is something that could work within your organisation, which I'll send out after today. And that's me. Thank you very much. I'll hand back to Dean.
Thanks, Pam. My guys, we're kind of overrunning a little bit here. I've just got a final slide there from us that just we've pulled together a return to work checklist that just runs through all the things, maybe what Vicky had covered in her presentation. I've kind of got a shortened URL there. If you just copy this URL here, I'm highlighting into your browser, you should be able to take you straight to a page where you can download that checklist. And if you need any help with any of your COVID-19 risk assessments, then just give one of us a shout, and we'll be able to chat to you about anything that you might need some help with. There are a couple of questions that came down the side there. One of them is definitely a health and safety question. One of them I am not even going to attempt when it comes to HMRC stuff. So from a health and safety point of view, what's the legal requirement number of first aiders and fire wardens? As with anything in health and safety, the answer is it depends. It really, what the health and safety executive recommend is performing the fire risk assessment and a first aid requirements assessment. It's going to depend on factors such as how many people are you in the workplace, what's the type of work that you're doing, what is the fire risk, what's the injury risk. Taking, for example, a small office kind of based workplace, say 10 people, do you need any first aiders at all? Unlikely. If you assign a first aid coordinator, just someone who's required to pick up the phone in case of anyone getting hurt, then that's usually sufficient. However, on the opposite end of the scale, you've got a 100-person engineering workshop. You might need to have a little think about how many first aiders per area, how many backups you need, and that the same applies for fire wardens. So what I'm kind of saying is you need to do an assessment based on your workplace rather than being a legal requirement for this number of first aiders or fire wardens. Have I got that right, Matt and Vicky?
Yeah, absolutely. What I'd add is that, we've spoken a lot about hybrid working, and you may not get your normal first aiders or fire wardens back in the workplace full time. So what we've been recommending to a lot of our clients is they upskill more people to become fire wardens or first aiders or offer that training. So you've got a broader pool that you can draw on if needs be, because, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 may not be the normal anymore. So you may not have your dedicated fire warden or first aider in full time. So you need to make provision to ensure that other people are trained up as well.
Cheers, Matt. And as I say, I'm not touching the HMRC question. I'm going to leave that to either Mary or Pam.
I think just, Shona, the question regarding the flexible working and whether or not it may become normal to claim travel expenses. Obviously, it's not something that has been touched upon yet. I guess we can only guess an answer to that one. I mean, the point of being able to claim travel when you're working out with your sort of normal contracted workplace is that it doesn't happen all the time. So I guess it would depend potentially, Pam, on what the contract states as your place of work being. So that might make things clearer in the sense that if you're travelling away from your normal place of work, which may be home, then you should be able to claim travel expenses. But I guess we just need to either rely on the contract or rely on what the actual established pattern would be. So if it becomes more normal that your workplace would be home, then I would imagine that you may be entitled to claim travel expenses. But again, hopefully it's something we'll get more guidance on as time passes. Anything to add, Pam, to that?
No, I would absolutely just echo everything you've said. Beforehand, you were expected to travel from your home to your office, and that was just part of it. So your home now becomes your office. So it very much depends on what the default place of work is going to be. It's another one of these try it and see things, and we're certainly waiting on some guidance on this as to what it looks like in terms of a contract moving forward.
Okay. I think if that's all the questions that we've got, then it just again, thank you all for a very insightful and informative presentation. Hopefully that's given everyone a good run through of sort of current workplace considerations. There is lots to consider there, but hopefully each of you have taken something away from today. So thank you for joining us once again, and thank you again to Matt, Dean, Vicky and Pam. That was great. Thank you. Take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.